Welcome to the Bare Metal Cyber CRISC Prepcast. This series helps you prepare for the exam with focused explanations and practical context. Key risk indicators, or KRIs, are measurable values that give organizations early warnings about rising risk exposure. They function as forward-looking signals, designed not to measure the damage after something has gone wrong, but to alert risk professionals and stakeholders when risk levels are trending toward unacceptable conditions. KRIs support proactive decision-making by offering insight before incidents occur. They help track emerging risk trends, support timely escalation, and improve the overall quality of risk governance. CRISC professionals use KRIs to align monitoring activities with business objectives, risk tolerance, and treatment plans. Without KRIs, risks may only be detected once damage is done. On the exam, candidates must recognize that KRIs are leading indicators, not lagging indicators. The strongest answers involve measurable foresight, not backward-looking analysis. An effective KRI shares several core characteristics that make it reliable, relevant, and actionable. First, it must be predictive. It should detect shifts or trends that suggest a risk is growing or evolving. A good KRI doesn't just tell you what happened, it helps you anticipate what might happen next. Second, it must be measurable. KRIs must have defined units and consistent tracking methods to be valid. Third, it must be directly relevant to a risk scenario, tied to a specific threat, vulnerability, or control. A vague or generic metric will not help with targeted risk response. Fourth, the KRI must include escalation thresholds. These thresholds define when a KRI reading requires action and help distinguish normal behavior from concerning trends. Lastly, a KRI must be owned. Someone must be assigned to track the data, interpret trends, and initiate response when needed. On the exam, questions often involve KRIs that failed because they were misaligned, unmeasured, or unmonitored. The best answers reflect all 5 traits: predictive, measurable, relevant, threshold-based, and owned. Common examples of KRIs vary by domain, but all point to increased likelihood or severity of risk. For example, the percentage of failed login attempts may indicate elevated cybersecurity threats or attempted brute force attacks. The number of policy exceptions logged by a business unit may suggest weakening process control or inconsistent oversight. The volume of unresolved incidents over a period of time may highlight capacity or resourcing issues that increase operational risk. The frequency of failed control tests may point to ineffective risk treatment or lack of compliance with internal standards. Vendor SLA violations or long response times may signal increased third-party risk exposure. CRISC professionals select KRIs based on the context of the risk register and treatment plans. On the exam, when asked which indicator best signals growing exposure, the best answer is one that directly ties to the risk scenario and offers measurable insight before failure occurs. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other podcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. KRIs must also be distinguished from similar types of indicators, namely key performance indicators and key control indicators. KPIs measure business success. They might track revenue growth, process efficiency, or customer satisfaction. They tell us whether goals are being achieved. KCIs measure control health. They assess whether specific safeguards are functioning, tested, and maintained. KRIs, in contrast, signal risk exposure. They tell us whether conditions are trending toward a potential loss. Each has a purpose, and CRISC professionals must ensure they are not confused or misapplied. On the exam, if a question asks which metric would help anticipate a threat, the correct answer will be a KRI, not a KPI or KCI. Choosing the wrong type of indicator leads to monitoring systems that focus on performance or control effectiveness rather than the forward view of risk. The selection of effective KRIs begins with the risk register. CRISC professionals review the highest priority risks, especially those with high inherent or residual scores, and identify metrics that might reflect early changes in exposure. From there, they match potential KRIs to each risk. A strong KRI reflects a logical connection to the specific asset, threat, or control associated with the risk. Stakeholder input is critical in this step. Risk owners, control owners, and business managers should be asked, what would tell us if this risk is increasing? The answer to that question helps identify meaningful, relevant indicators. On the exam, if a scenario describes a risk materializing without warning, it likely points to a KRI that was poorly chosen or entirely absent. Strong answers involve data-informed, stakeholder-validated selection that is grounded in business context. Setting thresholds is what makes a KRI actionable. KRIs must define acceptable levels of variation as well as the points at which monitoring becomes response. These thresholds are often expressed in 3 tiers: normal, warning, and breach, sometimes visualized as green, yellow, and red. For example, if failed logins exceed 500 per day, that may be the warning level. If they exceed 1,000, it may be the breach level that triggers incident response. Thresholds must be based on risk tolerance and operational insight, not arbitrary values. They must also be clearly documented and consistently interpreted. Escalation processes should be triggered when thresholds are exceeded, such as launching a treatment plan review, updating risk scoring, or notifying governance. On the exam, missing thresholds or arbitrary values often signal weak KRI design. The correct answer will involve meaningful, risk-aligned escalation logic that links data to action. Every KRI must have clear ownership and defined monitoring responsibility. Ownership means someone is assigned to check the data, interpret what it means, and initiate escalation when required. It also means the KRI is included in dashboards, reports, or system alerts that are reviewed on a regular cadence, daily, weekly, or monthly, depending on risk criticality. Escalation paths must be in place so that when a threshold is breached, the right decision-makers are informed and the right actions are initiated. CRISC professionals must ensure that KRI ownership is not ambiguous. Without ownership, KRIs become silent. Data may exist, but no one acts on it. On the exam, if a KRI exists but wasn't monitored or escalated, that's a failure of ownership. The correct answer involves assigning and confirming accountability for each KRI. Once KRIs are defined, owned, and thresholded, they must be embedded into reporting tools that make them visible. This includes dashboards, risk heat maps, scorecards, and GRC platforms that display current status, recent trends, and escalation alerts. Dashboards should show real-time or near real-time status for critical indicators. Heat maps can highlight where risk is trending beyond tolerance. KRIs should be connected to specific risk register entries so that residual risk scoring can be supported by measurable inputs. For governance teams and boards, KRIs help provide assurance that emerging risks are tracked and managed. On the exam, if a scenario mentions KRIs that existed but were not acted on, it often points to poor reporting or communication gaps. The correct answer will reflect timely reporting, visualization, and traceable governance integration. Over time, KRIs must be reviewed and updated to remain useful. As risks change, controls evolve, and business processes shift, some indicators may become obsolete or less predictive. CRISC professionals ensure that KRI reviews are part of the periodic risk assessment cycle. This includes adjusting thresholds based on new risk tolerance levels, refining existing indicators based on test performance, and removing KRIs that no longer offer value. New risks may require the creation of new KRIs. This adaptive cycle ensures that the organization remains alert and responsive to its current risk environment, not just historical conditions. On the exam, if a KRI failed to detect a risk due to outdated parameters, the right answer involves updating indicators and reviewing governance processes to ensure relevance. Risk exam questions about KRIs test the candidate's understanding of measurement, alignment, escalation, and governance integration. You may be asked which indicator best predicts increased risk, and the correct answer will reflect a direct link to a risk scenario plus defined thresholds and ownership. You may be asked what's missing from a risk monitoring plan, and the answer could be thresholds, trend data, or monitoring roles. If a scenario shows risk materializing with no early warning, the answer may involve weak or unmonitored KRIs. If a KRI threshold is breached, the next step is to escalate, reassess, and initiate treatment review. The best exam answers always reflect forward-looking measurement, traceable ownership, and integration with risk management workflows. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Bare Metal CyberC Risk Prepcast. For more episodes, tools, and study support, visit us at baremetalcyber.com.